Let's start with the environment then. There are different factors that contribute to the flavor of chocolate. And chocolate is very complex in the sense that not one single compound is identifiable for chocolate. Meaning, if you think about the fruits that we consume, for example, lemon or orange, there are a number of synthetic flavorings because it's narrowed down to a handful, if not one or two compounds that can then be synthesized, which will then give the connotation of what you would associate with a strawberry or an orange or a lemon. But when it comes to chocolate, there isn't a handful, but a larger selection of compounds. So therefore, you'd be challenged to find a synthetic chocolate flavor that doesn't contain cocoa when you're looking for an artificial or synthetic flavoring for chocolate. Having said that, we start with genetics, which is what gives the genetic makeup of the varieties that are planted at the farm. We start with genetic, and then we look at all the external factors, including soil, climate, farm management, water management, fertilization programs. Once the pods are harvested, the maturity of the pods itself when upon harvesting is a recently researched topic and one that I'm contributing towards. The paper examines the impact of harvesting the pods at typically we would consider 5 months as ripe, but we're looking at what happens if we harvest the pods at 4 months. What are the flavor impacts? What are the chemical composition impacts of harvesting 1 month ahead of what we would consider as ripe? And we term that matured. So that study is underway. Once it's harvested, we look at post-harvesting process. And this is where the majority of research is being done on how flavors developed during the fermentation process and then subsequently drying process. The drying process does have a significant impact on flavor as well. We talk about fermentation and drying, and to an extent, the storage of the beans once it's dried. We call that post-harvesting. Once all of this is done, we have a cocoa bean that is then transported to a chocolate maker's facility. And from there, we have the sorting, roasting, winnowing, yada, yada, grinding, refining, tempering, molding, and the rest to get us closer to a bar of chocolate.
So I've heard you say before that you are fiercely unblending. So I wonder what you mean by that and how you came to that.
The starting point of why I'm making the chocolate in the first place is because I want to taste something that is as close as I can get to the growing conditions that is expressive of the terroir. And another way of saying that is I want more terroir transparency in the chocolate that I make. This means that when I'm fermenting and drying, I'm only doing so on 1 day's worth of harvest from one single region. And if the same origin has another harvest the next day, it's treated as a separate lot. So first, for me, it has to be single origin, not just a country, but not just a state, but a single growing region. Oftentimes, that's either a cooperative of small growers or a single estate. And then always, it's also 1 day's worth of harvest. These are the beans that I ferment. Because if today the pods are harvested and have started, let's say today is Thursday, I've started to ferment the Thursday's harvested beans. And by Friday, we would have experienced 24 hours of fermentation. And on Friday, I go out to the farm and I harvest another batch of beans. Now, that batch of beans should really be fermented on its own, because if I mix the Friday's tomorrow's harvest with the ones I've started today, then you're not optimizing for it. The 4 days that were harvested on Thursday would have been either over fermented, leaving the Friday one under fermented, or if you're trying to please both days of harvest, or if you're going for the Thursdays, which was maybe the majority, and then the Friday's one would be under fermented. And therefore, that's not a result that is worthwhile just because we want to maybe save some time or not start another batch because we have less beans whatsoever. That's why I'm fiercely unblending in that way, in that I'm not looking for an average. I'm looking for practice that would highlight the fullest of the expression of one single harvest and of one single origin. And so this poses a different challenge, because when I'm supplying these chocolates to chocolate lovers or baristas or chefs, sometimes they will say, hey, I know there's a difference in this batch compared to the last. Can you be more consistent?